we don't have anyone around, and I was by myself and Oscar. He wouldn't go with others, he wouldn't go and make new friends. He's a bit hesitant. So I said to them, like, you know, he's like that. He wouldn't talk to everybody. He will just sit and play with his cars and take hours and hours. He can sit by himself, and he doesn't actually get involved with new activities. I had discussion with the cat.
Sometimes he struggled with routine, and it could be, and sometimes he was very stuck in routine where he just wanted the same thing, and then if something had changed, he didn't cope with that change. And at first, when I had to use Epic, I was kind of like, oh, what is this? All it was any child that I felt needed a little bit of extra support. You'd fill out some forms, do some observation on children, and then you'd get in contact with Kim, who plays a big part of it, and she's been amazing.
I oversee the rollout of our Early Intervention Services program.
And then she told me, why don't you come on and join the meeting with Jacinta.
So I'm here to actually help the educators to work with their family.
And then I lead the meeting just as a conduit between everyone in the room, ensuring that the conversation is child-focused. It's a bit of a thing to throw around, you know, that the parent is the expert on their own child. We really want to make that real and tangible for parents and for families.
Coming here is looking at the teachers and telling them my difficulties and finding the answers, all the answers. It's like making new friends. It's like the best thing.
Jacinta's at the stage of assessing Oscar and talking to Mum about whether he is school ready.
The really important thing, it's one of the things that really comes out from it, is that the families are able to identify where their child needs support.
They're the only way I feel like, you know, helping me through all this difficult time when I was by myself with Oscar. And I wouldn't, because at that time I didn't have anyone.
I know Mum's on her own here with Oscar, and you know, so that just led us to do the best we can for Oscar.
All I know is these guys are helping me. They're friends to me. Hi, my name is Meena Rani, and I'm Oscar's mum.
And what's your name? Who is this?
Oscar.
Oscar! Okay, Sarah.
I'll do whatever it takes, you know, for Oscar.
High five.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Oscar.
Okay.
Oh.
Good boy.
I'm But the Silva, we are at the men's shed trying to show the kids from primary school as to how we work at the men's shed.
I know that we're probably going to be building some things and probably do some gardening and stuff like that. We've got the teachers said we're making some bee farms.
I'm excited to build the plants and the boxes.
Yeah, it's fun, yeah.
I've been in this program for almost 9 years now. We started the men's shed in 2011, and since then we have been working here. Mostly we do community work over here, helping the people to build up their schools.
They meet us and they have something to do with their grandparents, and when they see us they've got a new idea of what life is about.
Meeting of Council for the 24th of September 2019, which is now open. A warm welcome to members of the public gallery who have joined us here tonight at the Civic Centre, as well as those watching from home via our live streaming. Thank you for joining us. As well as being live streamed, the recording of this meeting will also be available on our website, so attendees in the gallery are advised that their presence may be recorded, and I'd also ask that mobile phones please be switched to silent mode during the meeting. On behalf of Moonee Valley City Council, I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, spirits, community members past and present. Also like to extend this respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Thank you. Councillors, there are no apologies tonight. So firstly, can I please have a mover and a seconder that the minutes from the ordinary meeting of Council held on Tuesday, 10th of September 2019 be confirmed? Councillor Sypek. A seconder, Councillor Gatchim-Ritchie. Thank you, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Does any councillor have a conflict of interest in any item on the agenda this evening? No. Councillors, are there any presentations tonight? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I had the good fortune recently of travelling to Japan on a private excursion, and whilst there I took the trouble to catch up with our friends at Matsubara City, and they were very kind and generous in bestowing me with gifts for the city of Moonee Valley. They're very indebted to the treatment that they were received from our city previously, and for the students that have attended some local colleges. And so I pass these over to you, Madam Mayor, as a gift, and also pass on their regards and gratitude for the time that they had here. Oh, and they treated me extremely well, I might add. They're wonderful, gracious and hospitable people, and I was treated exceptionally well. They rolled out the red carpet, which I didn't deserve, but I'm gladly accepted, on behalf of yourself, of course. And so I just pass this on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lawrence. Glad you had a lovely trip. Councillors, we haven't received any petitions or joint letters tonight, so we now come to public question time. And as we have not received any questions from the community, I'll move on to special committees, but there are no special committees on tonight's agenda. So we shall move straight to reports at 10.1. And the first report on tonight's agenda is the 2018-19 annual financial report. So councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Sypek.
I'd just like to move the officer's recommendation, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Byrne, thank you. Are there any questions, councillors? Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. This report was done by our officers, especially Damien Hogan, who compiled our financial reports together with all Australian standards and all applicable accounting standards that have to apply to Australian accounting. It's been a very good financial report. I've read through it numerous times, found a few little anomalies in it, and I actually asked Damien about them, and he quite graciously explained them to me, and I was quite comfortable with his explanations. But I think it's very self-explanatory, and if you're in the accounting field, you'll probably get a lot of enjoyment reading out of it. It actually was good for me to read on a Sunday night, sort of got the melatonins going so I can go to sleep, but I did read through it, so thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will briefly. Just that Councillor Gatchim-Ritchie, Councillor Cusack and I, we all sit on the Audit Committee, and it did come to Audit Committee before it has come into the Chamber, and obviously the recommendation is for yourself and the Deputy Mayor to sign off for it to then go to the Auditor General. So Vargo's looked over it, happy. We've spoken through things in the Audit Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. The next report is agenda item 2.2, relates to the 2018-19 performance statement and governance management checklist. So councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Sypek, thank you. What were you moving?
Once again, Madam Mayor, I'll happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Lawrence, thank you. Are there any questions, councillors? Otherwise, Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak to the item?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Just like the financial report, this is a report done by our officers, and they've done their due diligence on there. It's quite a good report. Another one that I read on Saturday night, because after Collingwood lost, I had plenty of adrenaline running through me, and I had plenty of hours to read this report. So it was quite comprehensive, and I was very satisfied with the report.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, unlike Councillor Sypek, I was in an elated mood when Collingwood lost, and it was put me in a very good mood to read this report. And although I didn't read it on a Sunday night, but I can say that look, apart from a few minor issues that the report raises and seems to point out, the account that's accountable, and it's certainly accountable against the service performance and financial indicators as indicated in the report, and I can only endorse it for my fellow councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Would any other councillor like to speak to this motion? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. The next agenda item is 10.3 and relates to the submission to the Better Apartments in Neighbourhoods discussion paper. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Would you like?
Happy to move the officer's recommendation, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Lawrence, thank you. Are there any questions, councillors? Otherwise, Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak to the item?
Once again, Madam Mayor, I read this over the weekend, and I was quite content with what was in the report. I think it's very self-explanatory, and I'm happy to move it. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the motion?
Very briefly, Madam Mayor. Look, I think it's a good report, and I applaud the state government as the original report reflects back onto the recommendations from the state government. Certainly the green space, the building appearance, wind impact, street interface, construction impacts are all important aspects with apartments. I probably personally would have liked to have seen a bit more internal detail over the layout and the size of rooms, etc. But I guess this is a good start, and I applaud the report as such. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Marshall?
Thanks. So this is Council's submission to the Better Apartments in Neighbourhoods discussion paper, which is out at the moment. And fundamentally, this is about looking at how new apartment developments impact the amenity of existing neighbourhoods. And obviously, the Better Apartment Guidelines, design standards that came into place a couple of years ago now, have made a real difference and have addressed things in relation to internal amenity and some of the design elements of apartments themselves. But this goes that extra step, looking at that impact more broadly on neighbourhoods. Something that really stuck with me was that we had a briefing from council officers, and what they did in that briefing was put up examples of apartment applications that had been received pre-Better Apartments and ones that had been received post-Better Apartments, and it was absolutely incredible to see the difference in design, in all of those things that you want to create a nice space for people to live. And it really showed the power of good planning controls. And I hope, again, once this whole process plays out, and if this ends up coming into the planning scheme, that we'll see that sort of difference translate into neighbourhoods in a way that isn't just focused on the building itself, but focused more broadly. Certainly the issue around green space is one that we have had discussion ad nauseum in this chamber in relation to activity centres, and I remember very recently, relatively recently I should say, we approved 2 apartment complexes, one on Mount Road, I think it was, or I can't remember if it was either Mount Road or Ascot Vale Road, the frontage, and one on the other side. And one of the issues that we really focused on as councillors was around this issue of greening. We've raised that concern about, it's lovely to have the garden requirements, all that sort of stuff. That's great for single dwellings, for subdivisions of dwellings like that. But when it comes to activity centres, you don't just want them to be spaces where they are filled with big buildings and some tokenistic paving and streetscape works. You also don't want them just to have tick-the-box green walls that die after 6 months. You want them, where possible, to have meaningful greening, meaningful and sustainable greening. And again, as I've looked through the comments of our officers, it's really interesting to see that the comments basically reflect the lived experience, I suppose, for want of better terms, of the officers and councillors at Moonee Valley, the issues that we've come across a number of times, many times, about things where our own planning controls haven't probably stood up as we would have liked. And so we can see that those issues are ones that need to be addressed at a state level. We can't just rely on, I will ask for sorry, I didn't realise I'd spoken that long. Just a very brief extension, if that's okay. But that issue around greening in particular, with matters of biodiversity, food security, all of that sort of stuff is just incredibly important. And just because you live in an apartment doesn't mean that you shouldn't have that experience. I was really interested to see the construction impacts included as part of this, because it's something that I'm yet to think of a consultation, certainly none spring easily to mind, where the issue of construction impacts or concerns about them have not been raised by residents, and that's totally understandable. And usually our response is, look, that's not something that we consider at this particular stage. We consider that it will be a permit condition in particular circumstances. And that's right. So I think there's a lot of scope to revise how construction management plans work, and I know we've got, I think, one of the best officers in Moonee Valley who does an enormous amount of work in making sure that they are enforced appropriately. But to have some sort of statewide view, I think would be really great. I do wonder about having to lodge construction management plans up front, whether that would be necessarily an efficient process, because sometimes applications change so significantly that you can't help but wonder, particularly if you're looking at exit points and all of that sort of stuff, whether that might just end up being a slightly inefficient process. But look, I really thank the officers for their submission that has been drafted, and happy to endorse it. And as I said, I think where we have expertise, and we clearly do, we've got expertise and experience, it is worthwhile making a submission. I hope that that expertise and experience is reflected in, ultimately, the planning scheme.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Cusack.
Thank you, Mayor. I also support, obviously, the council officers' submission, and very grateful for the work that they've done. Just a few reflections on the better apartments. Finally, we're getting some traction and building it into the whole area of guidance about what decent apartment developments and building looks like. We have suffered in our municipality, as is much of Melbourne, from some fairly shoddy, if I can say that, design work, and very, very poor practices when it comes to the building of places, with shortcuts that are being taken and so on like that. And testament to that, of course, is on the news on a very regular basis right now. So anything that turns around and addresses the question of how community is supported during the process of building, and very much how the community is and its neighbourhoods are addressed in terms of the design, and how those design features work into a community are critical. And so the appearance of buildings and all those sorts of things, which are highlighted in the officer's report, are terrific. I just want to make a couple of other comments. That buildings of their own don't create houses or homes, and that it's all about creating neighbourhoods and that notion of community. And so therefore it's about how people identify with the place that they come from. And this is hopefully starting a process where you're integrating the common sense approach to designing things that make it work for people, that make other people think this is a nice place to be, and that people can actually talk about coming from this place, not just residing temporarily in it. And that then will add, hopefully, a lot more weight to the fact that we need, as a community, to start thinking about sort of what are our plans about working with people who choose to live in apartment-style environments, and how we respond to their particular needs as they go through various life stages and so on like that. And I like the idea very much of starting to look at that interface where building, planning, environment, and the intergenerational thing actually happens, and the interpretation of what green means. Green isn't just sticking a flower in a pot and calling it a green area. We have so many apartments that are, just a couple of seconds, I really am finishing, but we're so many apartments where we've really failed by building having no setback onto the street, where people can't naturally come together, where people can't actually say, isn't this a very interesting front? It's a little bit different. I do now see some new apartments around the city, and taste is always in the eye of the beholder, or something like that. But I was completely struck the other day as I drove up Margaret Street, Moonee Ponds, to the T-junction at Park Street, and right opposite you is a block of apartments and townhouses that was built on a very large area, and it caused a lot of angst in this council at the time. But that front apartment, I just love it. I love the swept lines, the triangular shapes. I like the fact that it's bold, very new. It's not square, it's not boxy, and it's not certainly off a plan that was pulled off a shelf. And that's hopefully is something we can start to see replicated around our community.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor wish to speak to this item? Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor, and I will commend our officers on a comprehensive commentary on this discussion paper, and as Councillor Marshall mentioned, using some of our own lived experiences and council's experiences to help hopefully shape state government policy. Obviously, it's no surprise to all of us how much apartment development we have put up with and are going to put up with over the next decade, with numerous developments taking place in the Moonee Ponds Activity Centre, over the road at Moonee Valley Racecourse, and on larger sites where they would be enabled to be built. Some of the comments picked up by council officers that I just want to mention. The idea of how an apartment building interacts with the streetscapes is really important, and I like that our commentary in this area has discussed and raised that idea of setbacks as well. and it links in with greening and it links in with interactivity with the public realm, but exactly how the apartment building and that streetscape connects, I think, is really important, particularly when there's quite a lot of discussion in the discussion paper about canopy trees, and that idea of how you can actually get that canopy cover on smaller sites where you don't have that deep soil, but even on larger sites, and whether or not that front interface can actually contribute to that greening, I think that's a really important point. I like Council's added the idea of ensuring making DDA compliance standard for communal open space, and I really commend our officers for picking that up, and I really hope that that is carried through at a state government level. Number of other items that have been picked up, and I really do commend our officers because the discussion paper is extensive in itself, but to bring our own knowledge to the table and hopefully help shape state government policy, I think is really important. So I commend this response, and let's hope that a lot of these points raised by our council are picked up at that state government level.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is entitled Moonee Ponds Creek Bridge Funding, Vanberg Road, Essendon to Hopetoun Avenue, Brunswick West connection. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Lawrence.
Move the officer's recommendation, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Second. Councillor Srace, thank you. Are there any questions, councillors?
Yes.
Question? Yes.
Just a question. I noticed that the stakeholders, such as, apart from our council, Melbourne Water, Moreland City Council, Friends of Moonee Ponds Creek and Moonee Bug, I'm just wanting to know if there's any financial contribution coming from any of those other parties.
I'll ask Ms Writer to respond to that question.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. Melbourne Water are making a contribution and Moreland will make the same contribution that Moonee Valley make.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Any other questions? Otherwise I'll ask Councillor Lawrence to speak to the motion.
Madam Mayor, I do have a question. Could I just clarify the cost, because there is an anomaly between the extra points that are made and the actual body of the report, and the cost of the point 2.10 says
it's confidential.
Is it confidential? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. The issue with the numbers was a change in the contingency. So we initially were having a more modest contingency, and it was considered that we should at least consider that there might be more. If we don't need it, they'll go back into consolidated revenue.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor Lawrence?
I would, Madam Mayor, and I thank you for the opportunity. Look, this is a good initiative that combines both state government, Moreland City Council and Moonee Valley Council funding to produce a pedestrian bridge and at a point in Vanberg Road, which is it's a dead pocket. If anybody's ever actually taken the trouble to go down there, it's a dead pocket within Essendon, and it just this will complement the whole aspect of the chain of ponds plan for Moonee Ponds Creek, and increases the access obviously between Moreland City Council and Moonee Valley City. As I mentioned, Vanberg Road is a dead pocket, and this allows for that access in and out of an area that was once used by none other than Steve Irwin, who grew up in Vanberg Road. Those who are familiar with Steve Irwin's great work, and he learnt a lot of that along Moonee Ponds Creek of all places, and he used to spend a lot of time at the creek. Obviously learning his craft about the environment and the creek inhabitants. It's a wonderful environment to ride your bike in the inner urban northwestern suburbs, and a bridge will make this a great addition to the area. The Chain of Ponds project, of course, is a long-term project for this council and for the City of Melbourne and and Moreland, and this will only complement it in the future. So I commend it to my fellow councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Serace, would you like to speak to the motion?
Not really. I think Councillor Lawrence has really summed up everything. I think anything we can do in our environment that is going to enhance better livability and access for our citizens and residents alike, I think is a fantastic thing. I think the fact that it has like a joint venture between state government and Melbourne Water and the other councils and community groups, I think that's a fantastic thing and probably should see more of it. And as with our Moonee Valley 2040, we want to provide a vision and strategic direction for our city. I think this is moving in the right direction.
Thank you, Councillor Strace. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Cusack.
Thanks, Mayor. This bridge was touted in an integrated transport plan many, many years ago and has been variously put to one side for various reasons in the course of planning and so on. One of the biggest disruptors, of course, was the northern storm water pipeline that went through, and a number of other things that occurred and had to be put in place before all of this could happen. So it's been a long time coming. But the critical thing about this is that its importance as part of linking all of the bits and pieces, or some of the key pieces of the bicycle path that runs along the Moonee Ponds Creek, and that it will provide enormous opportunities for access on either side of the creek. At present, people have to do an inordinate amount of travel to get from one side to the other, and it's not safe. And also, of course, you do have very informal crossing points that have been created over time. Many of our bike riders have also suffered over the whole process through not having something for such a long time. I note also, and Councillor Lawrence is so right about the impact and the capacity to lever now more activity into the Moonee Ponds Creek Chain of Ponds project, but it also will have direct application for the work that's going on at Montgomery Park and fixing that and giving opportunities for people to participate there. I think that it's also a fine example of continued and ongoing relationship that we have with Moreland Council, Melbourne Water and so on like that over a number of projects that are happening in the municipality, and in particular is highlighted again through the Moonee Ponds Creek Chain of Ponds project that has been so well designed. Now we need the cash, but it'll all come. And so this is an important part of it. And having at one stage lived down in Hopeton and needed to get to and fro across to West Brunswick, I wish it had been like that many, many years ago.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is 10.5 and relates to the Assemblies of Councillors report. Do I have a motion, please, councillors? Councillor Sypek.
Happy to move the officer's recommendation, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Byrne, thank you. Are there any questions, councillors? Otherwise, would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor
Yes,
Sypek?
once again, Madam Mayor, this is a procedural matter, and I think the report speaks for itself. It's just a recording of all our meetings and assemblies of councils.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Councillor Byrne? No. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Next item of business is notices of motion. We do not have any tonight. Urgent business. I don't believe there's any item of urgent business. Delegates report. Do any councillors have anything they'd like to report on in their roles as delegates? Confidential reports. The next item of business is confidential reports, and there is one confidential report this evening. So councillors, can I have a motion that the meeting be closed to the public under section 89(2)(h) of the Local Government Act 1989 to consider confidential reports? Councillor Sypek, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Thrace, thank you. I'll put that to the vote. Thank you, it's carried unanimously. So this is where we say goodnight to members of the public gallery and those watching via our live streaming. We now need to go into the confidential section of our meeting. So we thank you for your interest, and we shall see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.